Hey folks, today I'd like to talk about Leonard Cohen, perhaps one of Canada's most famous artistic exports. He was born in Montreal to a fairly well-to-do Jewish family. His father was a retailer of men's clothing. Cohen went to McGill University, where he, began to write poetry and learn how to play guitar. He devoted many years to the craft of writing, both poetry and novels. He wrote two novels, one called The Favorite Game, another called Beautiful Losers, and several volumes of poetry, which brought him to the attention of, the Canadian literary establishment, and actually won him some notable awards of the day. However, writing poetry and novels just did not generate much in terms of income. So around about the mid 60s, he decided to turn his hand to songwriting. And he moved to New York, and for a while, was on the periphery of the Andy Warhol crowd and other, literati of New York. He came to the attention of Judy Collins, who covered his song Suzanne, and actually introduced him to the public on the occasion of a music festival. And the rest, as they say, is history. So Cohen went on from being a poet novelist to being a fairly prolific singer songwriter. And although he did not have much of a vocal range in terms of singing, the very poetry of his songs appealed to so many people. And he soon found success in his own right. And of course, because of the quality of his writing, many other artists covered his material as well too, and extended his reach in that regard. Cohen, aside from being a substantive artistic figure, also had a very active spiritual life in the 70s or late 70s into the 80s, I believe. He was introduced to Zen Buddhism. Later went into a retreat in a monastery in California, was ultimately ordained as a Buddhist monk. And throughout, the balance of his mature years, demonstrated a, great deal of devotion to his spiritual pursuits and a certain stoicism in the face of, a number of difficulties that he had had over his life. So he's a bit of a man of mystery, of mysticism, and mistresses. And he's rubbed shoulders with, literati, military figures, filmmakers, Zen masters, and, Hollywood actresses. So he's got a pretty broad swath through, you know, um, North American culture, and his name is, fairly ubiquitous in terms of recognition. So, and he's got quite an interesting horoscope too, which, without further ado, we will now take a look at. So, here is the horoscope in question. Cohen was born 21st of September 1934, 6:45 in the morning in Westmount, which is a suburb of Montreal in Canada. So he's got Virgo rising, so dual signs on the angles. Now, the first thing we see here is Mercury in its own sign, its sign of exaltation, actually, in the first house. So this constitutes a Bhadra Yoga, one of the esteemed Pancha Mahapurusha yogas, which, can signify a significant person, and something of an archetype as far as mercurial qualities go. And what are the qualities of Mercury? Well, analytical, logical, literary, and ambidextrous and multi-talented in many respects. So this is a great start. Now, Sun Mercury together in the first house also constitute Buddha Dya Yoga, which is again, another mark of intelligence, logic, intellect, capable analysis, communications, and discernment. So all good qualities. Notice that with Mercury in the first house, Jupiter in the second and Venus in the 12th, we actually have what we call a mala, or a necklace, a garland of benefics surrounding the ascendant, Mercury, Jupiter, and Venus. So this is what's known as Shubha-kartari yoga. And, that is beneficial in a number of respects. I mean, it can provide attractive qualities, whether of physical nature, intellectual nature. It is a credit to the person's personality, character, and ultimately to their name and fame. So these are all stellar qualities. There's a Dana Yoga in here with the Moon, Venus being in a mutual aspect. Note that Venus owns, I should start with the Moon actually. The Moon owns one of the money houses, the money houses being second and the 11th. So the Moon owns the 11th house. And the rule for Dana Yoga is that the lord of a money house, 2 or 11, should combine with the lord of one of the triconas, 1, 5, or 9. So in this instance, it's Moon acting as lord of the 11th in mutual aspect with Venus, who is the lord of the 9th. And there you have a classic Dana Yoga. So that's also, ultimately a positive indicator for, some financial success in the course of life. Now, we always look at planets that are weak and strong, and quite quickly we'll notice that Saturn is a very powerful graha in this horoscope. Saturn enjoys double strength. It is Swarashi. It occupies its own sign of Capricorn in the 5th house. Furthermore, Saturn is retrograde and therefore bright in the sky at the time of birth. And that's another source of weakness. And so this very much strengthens the 5th house. And so this is good for all manner of, creative endeavors, whether they be, the ability to father children, write poetry, write novels, compose songs. It's even one of the indicators, for some performance capacity as well too. This is all well and good. The 5th house is also, one of the spiritual houses as well too. Indicating some devotion to practice. We might say it's more about spiritual practice than legacy, let's say. And so with Saturn there being very powerful, it has a resonance with any sort of spiritual practice that is, somewhat demanding, disciplined, austere, ascetic. So I'll get to this later, but, for some period of time, Cohen, took up residence in a Zen monastery in California, where he actually took a vow of silence for many years and was actually ordained as a Zen monk. So he does not have any of the classic spiritual yogas, Srikanta, Srinatha, Virinci. But, there are these keynotes of spirituality that do exist in his chart, one of which is this very powerful Saturn in the 5th house. Its alignment on the Rahu-Ketu axis sort of suggests some element of the foreign with respect to a religious or spiritual discipline or pursuit. And certainly, Zen Buddhism with its origins in Japan is certainly reflective of that kind of interest. The 9th Lord Venus has gone to the 12th house, and that also, indicates, spiritual journeys, retreats, pilgrimages, and, the foreignness or potential foreignness for one's gurus as well. What else is going on here? He has been involved, was involved with many, luminaries of the artistic field, whether actors or musicians. There was a love affair with Joni Mitchell, another with Janis Joplin that was immortalized in his song Chelsea Hotel. He was for a number of years with the actress Rebecca De Mornay. and he never married. He was with a woman for many years with whom he had two children, but he did not marry. He said because of cowardice, he did not marry. So, it's always a dilemma for people with dual signs rising. The Dvishvabhava Rashis, have a bit of a disposition for, ambivalence, reluctance, vacillation, uncertainty, confusion, reversal. So when you have dual signs rising, it can be a signature for, some irregularity about relationships. It's not an absolute rule because, many people with dual ascendants do marry. But, if you look at, if you analyze the prospects for relationship in this horoscope, you'll see that, it's not simple. The seventh house is unoccupied, but it is aspected by a powerful malefic Saturn and another malefic, the Sun. So it's got, that sort of swimming against the tide, if you like. The Lord of the seventh house is Jupiter. Jupiter has gone 8 houses away into the second house, Libra. That too is an indicator for, rough patches in relationships and some degree of difficulty, making relationships stick. Furthermore, that Jupiter, the Lord of the seventh house, is afflicted. An aspect from Mars, a debilitated Mars, and an aspect from a powerful Saturn. So the two prime malefics, Mars and Saturn, both afflict that Jupiter. Last but not least, Venus, the Karaka for relationships, is located in the 12th house. That's also somewhat problematic as well. It is not aspected by any other graha, but it is flanked, you'll notice, by Sun on one side, Mars, Ketu on the other. So that's what we call malefic hemming or flanking by malefics. So that too is problematic. And, Venus has no strength there as well. So all this made for, some difficulties with respect to relationships. However, nonetheless, he was very much a romantic. You see Moon in mutual aspect with Venus is always some indicator of a romantic and some, component of, desire as well too. This is a strong moon. With the sun in Virgo, full moon would be in Pisces. So the moon is almost there. So it's what we call a fullish moon. So that's quite a strong moon. He has Mars and Saturn in opposition as well too, and this is another lesser known passion combination. Although these are both what we consider sort of male planets in the context of passion analysis, which I go into in great deal in my book Kama Yoga. Mars-Saturn contacts, whether they be associations or mutual aspects as we have here, is one signature for someone who has a relatively active love life. But with some difficulties, and again, those who are who don't settle down seem to have this, pattern in their chart more frequently than others. What else do we have going on here? Mars and Saturn also form Viparita Yoga. So the rule for Viparita Yoga, which there's lots of confusion about that. But if you refer to Shastra, it says this: if the Lord of a Dushtana goes to another Dushtana not its own and is unassociated or unaspected by any other non-Dushtana Lord, and that planet is in strength, that's one form of Viparita Yoga. Another is if two lords of Dushtanas are associated or in mutual aspect in any sign, in any house, and are unassociated with or unaspected by any other graha, they too form Viparita Yoga, so long as one or the other of the participants has some strength. So let's look at this. Sixth lord is Saturn. Here's Saturn, and it's strong in its own sign. Eighth lord is Mars. Mars is here in the 11th house. Now, it's not strong, but Mars and Saturn are in full mutual aspect with each other. So they do form sambandha. That's the critical thing. One of them is in strength, Saturn. That's another critical thing. And they are unassociated with any other planet that is not a Dushtana lord. So check around this horoscope. There is no other planet or graha that associates or aspects Mars or Saturn, period, except for Rahu and Ketu. But Rahu and Ketu do not own any houses. Therefore, that's not a problem. So this is a full-blown Viparita yoga. So what does Viparita yoga suggest? Because of the, problematic nature of the Dishtanas, actually we're talking about the Trikishtanas here, houses 6, 8, and 12. The 12th is not in the picture in this particular horoscope. It's just lords of 6 and 8. We're discussing Saturn and Mars respectively. Because of the problematic nature of Trikishtanas, we expect some sort of trouble or difficulty. And indeed, that is what happens when Viparita Yoga appears. And yet it also, because it's the equivalent of multiplying -2 times -3 and getting +6. That's a rule of mathematics, or maybe perhaps just arithmetic. And it enables the individual to resolve their difficulties despite the initial problematic nature. So it's like that old saying, every cloud has a silver lining. And so this is suggestive of that. So what happens in the course of a person's life? They go through difficulties, and yet the difficulties, although they can be significant, somehow they were able to surmount them, succeed in spite of them, sometimes come out even stronger than they were before. So if you can like to think of it this way, an analogy is something like a sword forged in fire. And it comes out even stronger than it would have been had it not been, thrust into the fire. So this Mars and Saturn in his horoscope, enable that certain aspect. So this is quite a complex chart, and it's played out, in with the problems or difficulties vis-a-vis relationship. This is played out in something of an irregular love life. You became known as something of a ladies' man and never really settled down. The spiritual element is quite strong by virtue of this powerful Saturn. Late in the 80s or early 90s, when he really, came to grips with Buddhism and went into a California monastery for a significant retreat. I've forgotten now, but I think 5 to 7 years. And basically, he devoted himself to his spiritual pursuits. Unfortunately, during that same time, while he was, in retreat and under a vow of silence as well, and obviously not in communication with the real world, his business manager basically, fiddled the funds and cleaned out all of his investment accounts, sold off his publishing rights to his songs, even though he had no need to sell those. She did all this behind his back. And when he came out of the monastery, he ultimately discovered that she had embezzled almost 95% of his wealth. And although he took her to court and won his case, she refused to reveal her financial records, and he was not actually able to recover the money. So that's what we call a Pyrrhic victory. You win the case, but there's nothing substantive to reward you for the difficulties of having done that. So we see some of that suggested in the chart where Venus, Lord of the Second, has gone to the 12th house, implies some sort of financial loss. You've got the seventh lord, which we can take either as indicative of either an agent or a manager or a significant other, in a business context, having gone to the second and basically, entered your bank account. It is that Jupiter is, powerfully afflicted, and so, sort of reflects some sort of malevolent intent through her activities. And despite his actions, his legal actions, nothing good came of that. So he ran his Saturn Dasha from 1962 to 1981. And these were the formative years of journeymanship and craft in terms of writing. And that was both poetry, novels, and then, the craft of songwriting, which is what eventually, catapulted him into brand name recognition. His Mercury Dasha ran from 1981 through till, let's see, what would that be, until 17 years later would be 1998. And that was also, continued to be a very prolific period for him in terms of his literary work and songwriting. But it was also, the era of his spiritual indoctrination as well, too. He went into a monastery during his Jupiter Bhukti, and of course Jupiter is the planet of the graha for gurus and spiritual pursuits, and he was ordained as a Buddhist monk during his Saturn Bhukti. Then during Ketu Dasha, that's when he was really, in retreat in the Buddhist monastery, and it was during that period that he suffered the financial losses of which he did not become aware until he emerged early in his Venus Dasha, and then having been impoverished by his manager. Just when he thought he was, when he thought he had retired, he realized that to, resuscitate his financial accounts and to leave something as a legacy for his children and families, he went back on the road again, and he did a number of world tours to great success until, some degree of failing health began to trouble him, and then eventually he died. He suffered an accident at home. He fell, and then it was discovered that he had leukemia, and I guess that was the legal cause of death. He died during Venus Dasha, Jupiter Bhukti. So you see that Jupiter is a double maraka. It's the occupant of the second, and it's the lord of the seventh. And Venus is a single maraka because it's the lord of the second. And there ended, a remarkable life of literary achievement, world fame, and his songs to this day are adored. Most famously, perhaps the song Hallelujah, which is itself a kind of it sounds like a hymn, and yet it's also a love song of sorts, and that sort of encapsulates, everything that Leonard Cohen was. Okay, so back again just to scoop up a few bits that I didn't cover in the main analysis. So I neglected to mention that, Cohen suffered from depression throughout his entire life, and, there are astrological reasons for that. And you can come at it from a couple of different ways. You can do a fourth house analysis, which is basically looking at the manas, what we call the emotional mind. And there you have basically the fourth lord, Jupiter, is afflicted by both Mars and Saturn. You've got no aspects or influences upon the fourth house itself, but the karaka for the manas, which is the moon, has gone to the sixth house. That's problematic. It's in Aquarius, a sign of Saturn. That is also problematic. It's in a nakshatra of Rahu, also problematic, because both Saturn and Rahu are deemed to be, deranging or disruptive to the, to the tranquility of the mind. If we want to look at it from a different angle, which is looking at the buddhi, the analytical, logical mind, that's fifth house analysis. Now, as we saw, Saturn was powerful in the fifth house. That can make for a person who is quite contemplative, philosophical, inclined towards deep thinking. We've all seen, or we know people who are like that, which is sort of an inclination for reclusiveness and sort of deep thinking, and sometimes that deep thinking can take you off into the deep end with some associative problems. And of course, that Saturn, strong as it is, it does lie on the Rahu Ketu axis, and that can summon forth some odd thoughts or irregular thoughts. And it's afflicted as well by, debilitated Mars. So as strong as it is, that Saturn is also afflicted, and that can contribute to some of those issues as well, too. Now, in Cohen's life, the dashas, the formative dashas for him, basically, in his adult maturity, were Jupiter, Saturn, Mercury, and Ketu, and then Venus at the very end. But the substantive ones in the making of his career and identity: Jupiter, Saturn, and Mercury. Let's just discuss those first. They all occupy nakshatras of Mars. And so, according to principles of Nadi astrology, or if you subscribe to Krishnamurti Padati, it is said that, the lord of a given period, whether it be dasha or bhukti, will primarily give the results for its star lord, that is, its nakshatra dispositor. So Jupiter, Saturn, Mercury all gave results for Mars, and that's a debilitated Mars. Which is also afflicted, being on the Rahu Ketu axis, aspected by powerful Saturn. And Mars is lord of the third and the eighth house. So, which I always characterize, as potentially, an agent of misadventures of one kind or another, and can lead to, sort of ups and downs in terms of, social contacts, certainly with respect to income, because Mars occupies the 11th house of both friends, associates, society, and income. And it reflects something of his affinity for the so-called beautiful losers, the underdogs, those who have struggled mightily to overcome their circumstances against all odds. He identified with them, and he himself, having arisen from, relatively ordinary circumstances to be kind of a superstar in a way, reflects, some of that ability. And again, we're back to this notion of it's something, because that Mars participates in the Viparita Yoga with Saturn, we get this notion of the sword forged in fire. And certainly his life, went through any number of upheavals, both, in terms of personal relationships and professional status, and perhaps even his spiritual life too probably had its struggles, because Zen Buddhism is very demanding, and of course financially he had his difficulties as well too. And yet, in a way, he rose above all of this to have succeeded, in a very notable way. Okay, that's the wrap up. Okay, hope to see you another time. Bye for now.